This project started a couple months ago. I went online to buy some Nanoleafs, and at that point I realized I cannot afford Nanoleafs. So I thought to myself, how hard can it be to build them yourself? Turns out it's pretty hard. However, the most challenging part of this build was just figuring out what materials to use. Once that was complete, coming up with the design, putting it all together, super easy. It only took a couple days, and I had so much fun doing it. The first thing you're gonna have to do, you're gonna have to mosey on down to your local hardware store. When I was looking up and down the aisles, I found this piece of lumber. It's 1 inch by 2 inch, and they sold it in 8-foot long boards. Best news, $1.85 for one board of this, and I think I used 7 or 8 of these in my build. So about 16 bucks total for the price of the lumber to get the Hexagons, 32 of them. So yeah, I'll leave the link in the description for the SKU that I use from Home Depot to get these, but I'm sure it's a pretty common piece that you can find anywhere. So I ended up using this. I believe it's called a sliding miter saw to cut the wood. Definitely recommend using something like this. It made all the cuts I needed. If you don't have one of these, ask your dad, borrow one from a friend. You can even go out and buy one. They're not that expensive. You'll probably need this for about 2 to 3 hours to make all the cuts you need, so not very long. But it did make the project, I feel, a lot more enjoyable versus using something else that was just going to be time consuming. I even thought about just using a hand saw, but I realized quickly that wasn't going to get the results I wanted. Now is where the fun begins. So we get to start cutting these boards down to the sizes that we need. Now from the previous project, I know I need 4 inches in length for each piece. Now this is still a flat edge, so I'm going to make a quick cut to get the angle that I need. The angles that we're going to need for this cut are 30 degrees. So I'm going to move my miter saw over to the 30-degree mark, lock it in place. Let's make our first cut here at that 30-degree angle. Now that we have that angle that we need, I can start to make my measurement. So again, I need 4 inches in length. I'm going to take my tape measure and mark out 4 inches approximate. Now I need 4 inches on the long side. So this is going to be the short side because the angle is going to be going this way. So the long side is what I need to be 4 inches in length. Now most of these miter saws have an LED indicator or a shadow so you can know exactly where the cut's going to be made. So I'm just going to make sure that shadow lines up right about at that 4-inch mark and then make another cut. Now let's measure it to see how close we were. So that is perfect, right about 4 inches. Now to make this go a lot quicker, you can use a block of wood, and most of these things have a little clamp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up with the last cut that I did. Line it up right against the saw there. And then move this board right up to that wood. And then I'm going to screw this in tight. So all this is doing is making sure that I don't have to measure each time 4 inches and that all my cuts are going to be the exact same since I'm butting everything up to the same piece of wood. So that looks good. Now let's move this over and see if we get 4 inches. So I'm going to take the piece we just cut. Looks to be right about 4 inches. I'm going to line it up with the one that we cut first, and yeah, they look right about the exact same. So that's perfect. Now I can make the rest of my cuts real quick. I'm going to show you here. So you want to make sure, again, the angle is going, there's going to be the short end of the long end. So make sure that it's the right angle. You're cutting it. After every cut, all you have to do is flip the board over and slide it in. That's going to make sure you're getting that right angle. Now that we have our individual blocks cut, the next thing we need to do is on each of these, we need to create a small little slit near the top, and this is where we're going to be sliding in the LED diffuser material that we're going to use. Now this cut is a little bit tricky, but I'll show you what I used and it worked out pretty well. This miter saw, you can go down, you can also go back and forth, and that's what I'm going to do to create that small little cut. Now I am not super concerned about safety, but even this made me scared, realizing that if I was just holding it here, my fingers would probably at some point be gone. On the right hand side, it does have a little screw that you can adjust. And then I don't know if you can see it, but there's this little stopper here. What that's going to allow you to do is come down, but it's going to stop it. It's not going to go all the way. So that's going to allow us to change the depth of the cut. And we don't want to make it that deep. We just want it a little bit there. We just want a little ridge, so the material that we're going to use to diffuse the LEDs can sit in there nicely. Now, what I ended up doing is I built this little thing to help me with this cut. It's not rocket science, but what I ended up doing is I put one of these like this, and then I put another one, you can kind of see right here, on top of it. So it's kind of looking like that from there. And I just super glued it together real quick and easy. I didn't get any too extravagant here. So that's sitting like this, and then I glued it to these boards here. Now what this is going to do, it's going to allow me to slide in each piece, and we're going to do it this way. It's going to allow me to slide in each piece, and it's going to keep it in place there, so there's not any rocking or moving, because I want this cut to be very straight, and I want it to be the exact same location on each one. And the reason why that's important, and I have a couple samples over here. So when we have the cuts on each one, we're eventually going to be putting these together, and we want those incisions to line up pretty closely so that our material is going to be able to slide in there and fit nicely. And we don't want it sitting like this, because that's not going to work, or like this, that's not going to work. I have to have it line up nicely like that. So here's what I did. I laid this on here, and what we want to do is this cut is going to be on the inside. So the long side, we don't want it on the long side. It's going to be on the short side. That's where we're going to make the cut. And the closer you can have it to the top, the better. We're going to go, and I have this lined up here from prior cuts right about there. And again, I'm going to lock this down so I'm not going to get any movement. And we'll see how this first cut goes. So I can slide this in, and that's going to be in there pretty secure. I have this pushed down, so again, when I go down, it's not going to go all the way, and you can kind of test it out to see what depth you're getting. You're putting it here by the side, and you can see that's exactly how deep it's going to be. I think that's probably about perfect. Again, we don't want it going super deep, because that's going to waste materials when we're cutting the diffuser, the material that we're using for the diffuser. And we don't want it so shallow that we run the risk of it not catching. So we just want it just a tiny bit down there. So let's make a cut here and see how it turns out. All right, so you can see that's about perfect. We can maybe go a little bit higher up, but I'm happy with where it's at right now. So we're going to stick with this. So we'll just go through the entire pieces here. Now that we have all of our individual shapes cut, we have the groove in every one of them. I'm just going to go through and lightly sand. You can kind of see there's just a little bit of fraying on the wood. Not much, but definitely something I just want to quick take a sand or two, get those loose ends off, so when we do put them together, they're going to be nice and tight like that. So now let's talk about what I use to diffuse the LEDs. In my opinion, this is the most important part of the project. Getting this right is going to make or break how it looks in the end. So I ended up going with some styrofoam plates, the Hefty Deluxe brand, And it was a process. I probably tried about 20 or 30 different materials. I was going in and out of hobby stores. I was ordering stuff off Amazon, and everything that I was testing out just didn't have the look I was going for. You could either see too much of the stuff underneath it, or it blocked out too much light. And I was at the store and I saw these plates, and I remembered seeing the other projects, and I was like, I don't like the way the styrofoam plates looked. You could see too much of the hot spots underneath it. But I bought them anyways, and I'm so glad I did. It was absolutely perfect. It had that uniform glow I was looking for. There were no hot spots, and it was the cheapest by far of anything I was testing out. It was $2 for a pack. You can't beat that. And that's what I ended up using. Now I'll walk you through how we combined the plates with the wood pieces that we had to create our hexagons. Next thing we need to do is cut the hexagon shapes out of the plates. And the way I did this to make sure it was the right size, I first laid down a piece of paper, and then I built a hexagon on that piece of paper. All right, that's pretty good. And then you just want to take a pencil and then draw a line at the bottom of each one. So that's our general shape, but now we need to make it a little bit bigger because it has to fit in those grooves. So all I did with this, just make a little dot further out from each of the corners, and then use a ruler to connect those dots. Now once you have that traced out, I just used a knife to cut that out. Just trying to stay as close as I can on that line. Perfect. So now we have our guide, and then we can move this over to a plate. And then just follow along. So we have our hexagon. Before we start assembling these, make sure you have all of your styrofoam plates the right way that you want them. And again, there's that shiny side and the matte side. I like having the matte side facing out. I just think it looks a little bit better. I'm going to put them all in the right order here so I don't forget as I'm assembling them. And the other thing that you're going to need that I use to put these all together is some basic wood glue. I went and got some Gorilla wood glue. This worked well. I think they say give it about 24 hours to dry. And you'll need some painter's tape. That's what I use. I'm sure other tape would work fine too, but this did the trick when I did it. Now we're going to lay out a piece of tape. And to begin, we want to start laying out some of these wood blocks, and we're going to need 6 of them to create the hexagon. And you're trying to, at this step, just make sure the top is as straight as possible. And rip off the last piece. And then for the amount of glue, I just put a little bit on one side. Not a lot. You don't want this to ooze out. You don't want to make it super messy. Don't forget to put it on the last one. I forgot to do that on my first build. All right, now make sure the matte side is facing up. Put it in the first groove, and you just roll it up. Make sure the plate stays in the grooves. All right, and then once you flip it over, you just want to make sure things are kind of tight. Just put the last piece of tape over it. And there you have it. So as you can see, it looks good. We have the first one done. We can set this aside and let it dry. And we just have to then do the rest of them. I let these sit for about 24 hours, and now I'm just going to take the tape off and make sure everything's still glued together nicely. Next step, we have to arrange these in the design that we want. I think I'm just going to go with a simple flower type pattern. We'll see how it looks. Once you find a design that you like, you have to flip everything over. This is pretty simple, so I don't have to worry too much about keeping everything the same. I can rebuild it once it's flipped over. So let's start flipping everything over. Now that we have our design flipped over, we have to begin creating the grooves or the channels where the LED lights are going to be strung through. Now you first want to figure out how this is going to lay out on your wall or wherever you're hanging it up. And what I did is the part that's closest to the floor, that was my entry point. That's where I had the LEDs start. On this project, my guess is it's going to be right about here. This is where the LEDs are going to come in. So that's where my first groove is going to be. Now from here, the idea is we're going to be stringing the LED lights through, and we're going to create a channel in between these two so we can string it through each one as we go. Now that means we need to cut some more wood, and I'm just going to be marking here where we're going to be making those cuts on each one just so I can keep everything straight. And as we're going through this, keep in mind it doesn't really matter how ugly or messy it gets on this side as long as it's butted up against one. You're never going to see it. We're not cutting anything that's going to be showing potentially. So these ones that are butted up against each other, those can get messy, they can get ugly because it's never going to be seen by anyone. Now you probably could come up with a way of figuring it out beforehand, and maybe you wouldn't need to use all these channels, but I'm not exactly sure how they're all going to fit in here. So I'm just going to make a cut to be safe on all of them. If I don't end up using or stringing the lights through an individual hole that I made, that's fine. As long as I have that as an option. I don't want to have to go back and realize, oh, I should have cut that one. So I'm just going to do it all at once, and then we'll start stringing the LED lights in. So I will show you how I made these cuts. I made them with a saw. You don't need to worry too much about making a mess here. You basically want a wide enough gap in each one where you can string 2 LED strips through. So about that wide. And then as far as the depth, just however deep an LED strip is. I used some clamps to clamp this down. Now that we have it clamped in, you want to make sure this isn't moving around because it's going to make it easier to cut. So I did a little bit of an angle. It's going to be easier to cut in to get that chunk out. You just test it by putting this in. So I think that's going to be just about perfect where we can fit 2 through. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be pretty, because no one's going to see this side once everything's done. And then we can put it back to the spot that we took it from, and we can move on to the next one. After showing my friend this project, he did recommend getting a router with a dado bit, I believe it's called. So I did pick up one of these, and I'm going to try it out on this project, see if it's a little bit simpler than using a saw on every one of these cuts. You can see a router with a drill bit at the bottom. This spins around real fast, and it's going to create that little groove that we can thread our LED wires through. So we're going to try it out, see if it makes it go a little bit faster, a little bit easier with this. But again, you don't need to use something like this. A hand saw worked just fine for me. Just took a little bit longer probably than this thing's going to take. This step I moved indoors simply because I wanted a very flat surface, so when I glue all these together, it's going to be as even as possible. You could use wood glue. I went with a hot glue gun. It was a little bit quicker and I just wanted to get done with the project. So now I have to flip everything over on the other side. And Alright, so everything is glued together. I'm just going to let it sit here for a couple minutes and then I'm going to flip it over and then we will start stringing the LED lights inside the hexagons. So this first one, I'm not really worried about putting everything on. I'm just trying to figure out if it is possible to get an LED along the edge of every single hexagon. So I'm just going to start stringing it through as if I were doing it and we'll see where this ends up. And then if I started the second one, so again we have two, so if I started the second one and started going here, 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 what I'm going to do now is take the sticky side off and start putting it on the edges of what we mapped out, and then I will have to go get my other LED strip and start going the other way on this one. And I'm just wanting to have it sit as high as I can at the top there. So I want to keep it as far away from the styrofoam plates, and that's just going to reduce the chances of having a hot spot. So I'm still going to need to string the second one up here till about here, but it looks like all of the hexagons have an LED around the entire shape. So that is great. That is great. All right, so let's string this one. Now the only negative side of these particular LED strips is, I don't know if it's just the rainbow effect where each LED can be a different color simultaneously. Once you cut them, all of the rest of the wire, the strip, is useless. You can't splice them back together. So that does kind of limit your ability to customize it and not really worry about the shape, because you do have to think about using the most of your LED strip, because you don't want to use, you know, a foot and then have to cut it, and then you waste the rest of the strip. You want to get the most out of the strips. So this one I used almost the entire whole one, and this one I'm not going to use a whole lot of this one, but that's fine. It's going to work out to be pretty good. If you guys know of a different type of LED strip that you are able to make a cut and splice it together and still keep that rainbow effect of different colors going simultaneously, let me know, because I'd be very curious of future projects using those versus something like this that's a little bit more limiting. I used this particular strip on a different LED product, and when I was peeling it off to use it on this, the stickiness came off, so I'm going to maybe try using a hot glue gun on this one. We are so close to seeing if all of our hard work pays off. So let's hook these up real quick to the adapter. And before we plug it in, I'm just going to flip it over to the side that we want to see. So we're just going to plug it in. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I do have a few more LED projects I'm working on that I'd love to share with you in the near future.